boys and girls, and why not, also adults who are visiting this channel. Welcome everyone. Here I will be sharing a space created for the little ones in the family where I will be leaving them stories created by me, and they will be narrated through my voice. The purpose is to have a fun and pleasant time in which they could listen to them during the day or, as was the custom in the past, before going to sleep. And well, without further ado, here we go with the story. Hope you like. The Adventurous Goose. One Sunday morning, a family that lived on a farm decides to go to a very large fair that takes place on the last Sunday of each month. Many things were sold at that fair, such as clothing, handicrafts, and food such as jams and cheeses, but the stallholders also took advantage of bringing animals from different farms, such as chickens or rabbits, and tried to sell them. On their farm, this family had many animals such as chickens, pigs, ducks, cows, and even rabbits, but they had never bought geese. The family gets out of the car and begins to tour the fair in search of a goose. Every time a new animal was going to be bought for the farm, the children asked their parents to buy the small animal so that they could raise them as they had done with all their animals that they now had on their farm. The children knew that geese are very large birds that are relatives of ducks but had never seen one. Their mother had told them that quilts and pillows are made with their feathers and that they were very soft and comfortable, but they would not buy a goose for its feathers but to be able to sell its eggs in the future. It was very hot, and the number of people there made it difficult to walk through that fair that seemed like the last stall would never be reached, but the family would not leave without first buying the little goose. Thirsty children buy popsicles and cotton candy for the return trip. The mother buys a new rosebush to plant in the garden, and the father buys 4 little fish of different colors for the fish tank in the living room. They were still moving slowly through the fair, but none of the merchants had brought geese to sell, or at least none were yet to be seen. An old lady who sold little birds had a very pretty parrot on her shoulder. When the children saw that the parrot said hello to them, they looked at him happily, and the old lady gave them the parrot. His parents were not very happy, but the parrot was so funny with his words that they even accepted him with laughter. They walked a little more, and almost when they reached the last stall, next to a man who was selling a couple of goats, they saw a sign that said, "Beautiful geese for sale." "Look, look!" the children shouted. The children and their parents approached to see the geese, but in a large box there was only one left. The mother asks the merchant if he doesn't have any more little ones, but the man tells her that he only has that adult goose left. The children come to see him, and the parrot begins to shout, "Pirarr, pirarr, ugly duck, ugly duck." The children laugh and silence the parrot. The goose raises his head to look at them, but he looked quite angry. The family talks a bit and decide to buy the goose, even though it was already an adult. The next month they would go back to the fair to see if they could get another goose, but a small one. The merchant gives them a cage with the goose inside, and they go to the car to return home. Well, it was a good visit to the fair. Not only did we take the goose, but we also took a new rosebush, little fish, and a very talkative parrot, said the father. The children together in one voice said, "And also delicious cotton candy," they added with their mouths painted in colors. Once inside the car, the family starts the trip back to the farm. The parrot looked at the poor goose, who looked at each one with an angry face and did not stop yelling at him, "Ugly duck, ugly duck." The goose, looking at the parrot, said to himself, "If I could get out of this cage, I would take out all your feathers." I think the parrot and the poor goose had no intention of being friends. Finally, after so many kilometers, the family, the parrot and the goose arrive at the farm. They all get out of the car. The new members had to be accommodated. The parrot could sleep inside the house, but since he talked too much, the children's parents decided to put him in the barn along with the goose and other animals. Hours passed and the parrot, already inside the barn, looks for the goose to fight with him. The goose had come out of the barn and found an old hole in the wall and said to himself, "Bah, this place is better than that barn full of stinking animals and that mocking parrot that always repeats the same thing." And saying that, the goose that night slept there peacefully in the hole. Very early in the morning, but before the sun began to rise, Jacinto the rooster would already begin his crowing so that everyone on the farm would start the day. The goose, who had not slept as well as he thought he was going to because the sounds of the crickets bothered him, was already waking up upset because the rooster had interrupted his sleep. The owners of the farm begin to distribute the food for each animal. The goose had to eat together with the ducks, and since he did not like to share, he took a bag that was flying in the air with his beak and filled it with food and went to eat alone away from the others. There, under a small tree, the goose pecked at some grains and listened. Ugly duck, good morning," said the parrot that hung in its cage on the tree. The goose stopped eating and replied to the parrot, "Hey talkative feathered, you don't realize I'm not a duck, I'm a goose," the goose told him, too angry. The parrot that did not know how to close its beak replied, "Duck or goose, you are ugly just the same, purr, purr." The goose, picking up his food, told him, "I'll see how I do, but I'm going to leave here and you won't have anyone to fight with." The goose went to eat in another place, but the parrot kept the words that the goose had said. While the owners of the farm were talking in the kitchen of the house, the goose, which was just under a window that overlooked the kitchen, listens that the husband tells his wife that tomorrow, after leaving the children at school, he had to go to the city center for the spare part of an old tractor that had stopped working. Then the goose, listening to his master's words, said to himself again, "Great, tomorrow is my chance to leave this place. I will travel the world and find a better place to live." The goose was definitely not happy on the farm. The next morning, and before Hyacinth the rooster crowed, the goose was already awake. With a small bag tied to the end of a long branch, he stored enough food for the trip. Now he was just waiting for his master to get up, and when he got home from the children's school he could get into the car without anyone noticing. The master returns, gets out of the car and goes inside the house to pick up some things that he had left to store. When leaving the car, one of the doors had been left open, and on that occasion the goose, taking a good jump, manages to enter the back of the car. Now they're very still so as not to be discovered. He just waits for the car to start. Finally the car is started by the master, and thus they leave the farm. Almost 2 hours had passed since the master and the slippery goose had gone out. On the farm the mother and her children had made a small pen so that the goose would no longer have to sleep in that cold, dark hole it had found. The children look for the goose all over the farm, but it does not appear. The parrot that saw and heard the children looking for the goose remembered the words of the goose when he said that he was going to leave the farm, and as we all know, the parrot did not know how to close his beak and began to shout, "Purr, purr, ugly duck is gone, ugly duck gone." The children looked at each other and ran to tell their mother what the parrot had said. The mother helps them look, but it was already getting dark and the goose had not appeared. So she calls her husband to tell him, "Honey, the goose is lost. "We have been looking for it all afternoon with the children and there is not a single feather of it," said the worried wife. The husband replies, "He must be hiding somewhere on the farm. He'll show up," he replied, trying to calm her down. It was already night. At a service station that was on the road, almost reaching the city, the owner decides to stop to eat something and while refueling. The goose, taking advantage of the fact that he was alone, packed a few grains of food, because the trip had made him hungry. Minutes later the owner returns to the car and they continue their journey until they reach the city and find a place to spend the night. The city was so big that the goose was surprised by the number of lights he saw. The master manages to find a lodging and when he gets out of the car to find out if there were rooms available. The goose, again taking advantage of the fact that he was alone in the car, manages to get out. Out of the car, he begins to walk. Several times he is surprised by loud horns from vehicles of different sizes that make him jump in fright. Scared by the vehicles, he keeps walking and begins to feel very thirsty. A few steps further down the path he sees a small pool of water and stops there to drink. "I must keep walking and look for a quiet and safe place to sleep because it's too late to continue walking," he told himself, trying to speed up his pace. Several times vehicles on the highway honked at him and drivers yelled at him to get out of the way. Suddenly, trying to hurry his legs and get off the road, he sees a very large dog running towards him behind him. The poor goose quickens his pace and manages to escape. He comes to a field with many horses. "Help! Help!" cried the goose. The horses slept and neither heard nor saw when the goose darted past them. When crossing a fence, the goose sees a kind of little house and gets inside and spends the night there. After so much fright, he fell asleep. The next morning the goose woke up. It was strange not to have heard the loud crowing of the hyacinth rooster, the sound of the ducks and other animals. The goose looked around and felt very lonely. The little adventurer was starting to miss even the loudmouth parrot that always used to fight him. Several weeks had passed. The goose, seeing that there was a lot of danger in the city, decided to stay there in that little house that apparently seemed to have no owner. The food he had brought for the trip was almost gone. He had to find a solution, continue his adventure traveling or return to the farm. A new night arrives. It was very cold and dark because Mrs. Moon was lazy and decided not to go out. The sounds of owls and crickets kept the goose awake. Suddenly the sky begins to light up. An electrical storm surprises the poor goose. That night had been terrible. The little house where our feathered friend was staying had several cracks and the goose was wet from beak to toe and frozen from the cold. On the farm, the family had adopted a goose, also an adult, that its owners decided to give it up for adoption because that farm would be sold, and since the goose was missing, the family kept the goose. With the passing of the weeks, it had already been a month since the goose had embarked on his adventure, but after several nights in which the sounds had not let him sleep, several storms had passed, he had gotten wet and been very cold, so the goose decided end your trip. Determined, the morning of the next day he begins his return journey. He did not remember the road very well because being hidden in the back seat of the car he could not see the road well, but the dangers he had survived made him realize that this trip away from the farm had been a mistake. The poor goose did not remember having been so scared in his life. Walking endlessly, without food and without water, the goose's legs begin to weigh him down. Already exhausted, he decides to rest for a few minutes. Fortunately, a car that was going in the same direction as the goose punctures its wheel and the driver prepares to repair it. The goose regains strength, and when he sees the trunk door ajar, he jumps in there. Now the trip would be shorter, thought the goose. With the tire repaired, the driver got back on the road and continued on his journey. The goose, without taking his eyes off the road, began to recognize things he had already seen. He heard sounds that were familiar to him and smells that he also knew. That meant he was coming to the farm, his home. Hours later, the goose recognized a neighbor's house. It was time to get off. So to make the car stop, he started making loud noises with his beak. Surprised, the driver brakes, and before getting out of the car, the goose manages to get out with a great jump. The goose stands in front of the house of that neighbor who remembered seeing it before, but did not see the farm. I was confused. Standing there looking at the house, he hears the laughter of some children. He turns, and behind him he sees some children playing. It was the farm. His journey was over. Running very fast, he crosses the gate and reaches where the children were. "Mom, Dad," the goose appeared. The children shouted happily. The parrot from his cage also broke the news. "Ugly Duck is back, purr." The children and their parents gave the adventurous goose food and plenty of water. After he ate, they took him to his new little house, and the goose was waiting for him there. The goose and the goose fell in love. The goose told the goose about his adventure and told her that the best home was not where they would not bother him or a nice place, but that the best home was where they love you even if they make jokes like the parrot, even if you have to share us with ducks or wake up to the crowing of a rooster. Home is where one feels safe and accompanied. End. Well friends, did you like the story? If so, I hope you will give me a like, subscribe to the channel, and leave your comments about the story and give suggestions to write more new stories. With this, it will be until a new video, a new story, and well, thank you all for listening to me. I hope you liked it. Bye bye.